Analog computing. Wow. The response I got from that video yesterday was absolutely insane. Okay. So much discussion in my comments. And you know that here at Rubin Tech, where we meet at the intersection of tech, politics, and finance, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button down below. But anyways, you know that on this channel, I feel that we have the best comment section on all of YouTube. I mean, we have just great high-level discussions down below. But the discussions here were even beyond normal of what we normally have. And so I felt I have to address a lot of the users' comments and go more into detail on this topic. And so that's what this video is going to be today. But I got a lot to cover. So I'm going to talk really fast and try to get through this because I don't want this to be an hour-long video because I know nobody will make it through. Okay. Kaya writes, capacitor or resistor? Oh, I got to switch back. Kaya, I thank you so much for not being a jerk. You could have called me an idiot and that would have been your right. Obviously, I went back, I listened, and I said capacitor so many times. That's the problem with doing things off the top of my head. You get that word in your head, then it's stuck there. Yes, I meant resistor. Thank you for being polite. I really appreciate that. Next comment from user Jack Schultz 2024. A more accurate description of these chips is analog digital hybrid chips, where the rough calculation is done by the resistive RAM array and the integrated digital processor that acts as a refinement circuit, which iteratively refines and corrects the result. Jack is absolutely correct. Jack, you are 100% accurate. And the reason I didn't go into this is twofold. One is because I never know how far into depth I should go on this channel on certain things. And two, because in the title, I really wanted to keep this the idea about analog chips if they're a threat to Nvidia. And this doesn't help too much with the AI training. I shouldn't say it doesn't help at all, but it doesn't really address the issues in training. I will go over that later. And so I didn't think it was too important to the main subject of the video, but Jack, you are 100% correct. That is the best description. I actually like how you write that. Lunchick2689 writes, your explanation is a bit all over the place. Thank you very much and welcome to the channel. That's why I included your comment. I love that statement. AI Media 9020 writes a philosophical question here that I really like, these kind of deep questions. The problem with the Western approach to AI is that we're trying to recreate the most complex item in the known universe, the human brain, but we're only allowed to use ones and zeros. The human brain is not digital. It's analog. Oh, I love this comment. I think the human brain is quantum, and some people argue that quantum is analog and digital. It's both. So anyways, I do love this comment. Then he tries to give me a little bit of a spanking here because he says, these technologies are not in the lab. He's directly quoting me. Actually, these technologies are in the lab for what I was referencing, which was the Tsinghua paper and the paper from the Peking University. He goes on to say that Tsinghua released their Tai-Chi photonic processor, which I want to point out is a lesser watered down version of what they're working on in the lab. Okay. So that's why I stated that. And just so we all know here, I want to be clear. Analog chips have been around forever. In the 1950s, they had analog chips before they had digital. So it's not like an entirely new technology. So you could say these technologies have been around for 70 years. Technically it's true, but the ones I was talking about, okay, where they're trying to create the latest, greatest chips, that could compete on this kind of level with Nvidia or in edge computing and be truly useful, right? They are in the lab because they have issues. So this Tai-Chi, again, this is a watered down version. They created a production line. Well, yeah, of course you're going to create production lines because if you believe in this technology, you're going to want to have the technology ready to go if you have a breakthrough. Okay, so of course they're going to get production lines ready. Fully operating Chinese analog photonic chips are today shipping in moderate quantities. Military manufacturers already have them working. Expect them in consumer markets by 2028. This reminds me a lot of quantum. As you know on this channel, I'm a huge quantum guy. Military manufacturers already have them working. Military manufacturers and finance enterprises in America are already using quantum chips. What can they do with them? Nothing useful. Okay, they're just getting ready in case these chips are something, and they're getting ready for the future. Okay, photonic chips are today shipping in moderate quantities. Moderate is the understatement of the year, as I will show you. Expect them in consumer markets by 2028. I put out the most aggressive timeline yesterday as 3 to 5 years. This would be 2 years. I would think that would be extremely aggressive. And even if they are, it would only be in edge computing. which doesn't mean a bad thing, and it'd be useful. So this is just the moderate quantities. Chipbacks and Turing Quantum, that's the two companies he's talking about over in China that lease the photonic chips from the university. They have a manufacturing about 12,000 wafers a year. Okay, so those wafers are providing 350 chips. So right here, this says this level of output represents a meaningful industrial foothold. That's absolutely right. But 350 chips is not much, okay, compared to a mature semiconductor fab, which produces hundreds of thousands of wafers annually, right? Or you look at something like TSMC, which is producing in the millions, okay? So making 350 chips of these, in a year is moderate, is tough to say, right? I wouldn't say that's even moderate. I would say hundreds of thousands might be moderate compared to the scale some of the larger fabs are. But what I'm not saying is bad either, okay? They're just trying to get their foothold. They're just trying to get ready for the future, okay? I hope China can, this is my favorite comment. Why? Because I'm a gamer at heart too. I hope China can produce good consumer GPUs comparable to Nvidia's RTX in the near future. I'm fed up with Nvidia's predatory pricing practice. That's from Fazai245. Fazai, I got some bad news for you, right? On one front. China may produce these good consumer GPUs. I hope they do too, but it will not be from analog computing. Analog computing would be the absolute worst at video game graphics. The reason for that is video game graphics use polygon graphics, and the vertices, when you're calculating these vertices, they need to be absolutely precise, right? So that they line up and it creates this digital world that looks really nice. And if we used analog chips for that, obviously because of the precision problem, you would have a world that shimmers, as all the polygons would slightly have like shake to them, this mini amount of shake from the air. And you wouldn't like that. Plus, these chips are only do matrix math, where GPUs can do other things like shaders and other different kind of logics that can handle an if-else statement, just as an example. So you didn't get the bit where they have solved the analog issue and a new chip is ideal for AI training. This isn't a bad comment, but I don't like how the Freeman Chance 807 says they solved the issue. No, they didn't. I actually read this paper. Okay, I'm going to go over it with you. I read it before I talked yesterday. The paper I think he's reading. And Freeman Chance, just in case you saw a new paper, please send it to me. I did do a search this morning. I couldn't find anything new. And a new chip is ideal. It doesn't say that either. It doesn't say they've solved the issue. It doesn't say it's ideal. Okay, so I will get into this later, this specific issue. The answer is no. China lies about everything. Mike Stewart, I imagine you are MAGA. Maybe you're not. I don't know. I shouldn't just say that, right? But I do not agree with this. However, I wanted to put you up there so everybody could see you and comment on your comment. Calling you out a little bit there, Mike. Dude, it's pathetic the way you try to say China's bad, right? I'm not saying, I never said China's bad. If you watch my channel, I've been accused of being pro-China. Every new tech starts like that. Remember NVIDIA's first GPUs? Yes, I do. And also there's Western attempts at analog chips and ASICs from Google. Analog chips have existed for 75 years, as I said, and Google's had ASICs, their TPUs, running for 7 years. So I don't really get that. But I wanted to include this because every new tech starts like that. Remember NVIDIA's first GPUs. So I want to talk about this because I don't want you guys thinking that I'm being negative about these chips. On this channel, I love technology. I get very enthusiastic about it. Okay, but I try to walk a fine line where I don't let my enthusiasm make me unrealistic. I try to remain skeptical of everything just a little bit. And so if I'm a little bit skeptical of something, right, don't think that means that I'm not for the technology. Okay, I've talked about quantum computing. That's like my favorite technology. I really hope it happens, right? I read about it all the time. I really hope it happens. I read the papers. But the simple truth is that I know as well as anybody else that it may never come. It may simply never happen. Okay. And, if it does happen, it could be 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It could be a while. Okay. But that doesn't mean I'm not enthusiastic. It doesn't mean I'm not following all the news. It doesn't mean I'm not hoping within 5 years, 10 years, possibly something could happen. But if I was going to bet money on it, absolutely not. I wouldn't bet money on 5, 10. I wouldn't even bet money in 10 years. I mean, if you gave me the right odds, I might bet on 10, but definitely not on 5. Okay. And so when I'm saying this, I'm not trying to rip on the technology. In my estimation, I just think these are going to take a while. That's all I'm saying. And I listed out a lot of the reasons, and today I'm going to list out a few more. Okay. And NVIDIA's first GPUs proves my point, because even when you release the first generation of something, it's usually not great. Okay. Like it takes a few iteration cycles. And for NVIDIA to get where they are today, it's taken what? Decades? Okay. So how long until these chips become mature and are able to take over, if they could, and if they end up being able to take over GPUs as we have today, digital GPUs, how long would that take? Okay. Based on the history of technologies we have, right? I mean, I remember when everyone's like, oh, the internet's here, retail is dead. It took decades for retail to die off. Did it eventually happen? Yes, but it took decades. It's not like, oh, we got the internet in 1995, retail's gone, close your doors. Okay, I just went to Walmart the other day. There's still retail shops. Okay, so that's not how technology works. All right, now in this next section, I want to cover some infographics I gave to you. And with this, I'm going to talk about that paper a little bit more that I brought up. Okay, so this is the Nature paper that I think our one friend was referencing, but I'm not sure. It's possible. I want to be fair that they found new paper. But this is from Tsinghua University, continuing their research, into this topic. And here they run an experiment, a very small control experiment, and they publish this paper. It's a great paper. I will put a link to it if I can remember. Precise and scalable analog matrix equations solving using resistive RAM access memory chips, RRAM for short. And what he talks about here is precision has long been the central bottleneck of analog computing. Okay, so I said that. And so basically what they're talking about in this paper, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but they believe that, at least in this experiment, that they were able to achieve 24-bit fixed point precision, which is comparable to them, and they're using their technique to 32-bit floating point, now FP32. Now, if you're a computer science student or you work in AI, you might say immediately, those two things aren't comparable. But they're using a technique called bit slicing, where they're breaking up this 24-bit number, and they're kind of creating their own floating point, their own FP32 number in a way. Okay, so I just want to put that out there, that's kind of the angle they're taking. However, just to understand, this test is very, very early. So again, for someone to say that this problem solved off this paper is just, I mean, you got to understand the scale of this. They're doing this on 16 by 16 matrices in a completely controlled environment, okay? Nowhere in this paper does it say, we've solved it, it's done, okay? Because these are researchers, they're very smart, and they know they have a long road ahead of them. 16 by 16 matrices are extremely small. They do say, if this was to work, look at what we did at this, of course, at this size, right? And it works for training neural networks. And of course, neural networks aren't LLMs, but you could then, say, well, then it probably could work for LLMs also, because the two are not the same, but they are similar in ways. Okay. But just to be clear, this is only one of the issues facing these chips when it comes to training. And I will get into that in a second. I'll get into more of that. So now I want to get to my infographics. So remember, yesterday I had AI make these infographics for me. Talked about the digital GPU and the problem it had. The problem is that it has all this data. And we got these stop signs, right? And the trucks are idling. So imagine these trucks are data. They're moving around the board, okay? They're going from the processor to memory to all these other places. And it's slow. You can see they're idling, right? It gets stuck. There's a queue. There's a line. It's always busy, right? They have to stop, go, things like that. It's very constricted, okay? Analog chips are like flowing water. And I will admit this isn't the best diagram because we should only have one input, one output would be better. Not that I'm trying to represent the chip exactly, but just so you know. And basically what you're doing is you are using the flow of the water, and you're using these valves which provide resistance, right? And you use pressure of the water, and use these valves which provide resistance to create this current on the opposite end. So now we can come over here, and this is Ohm's law for electricity, but shown to you with water. Yesterday I said Ohm's law is current is equal to voltage divided by resistance. Of course, today I decided to put voltage first because that's the way it works with analog chips. They first adjust the voltage. And so the math equation is just times both sides by R. You get the same thing. So the voltage would be the water pressure, high pressure pushing down through this pipe. Over here would be the MEM resistor. Okay, the MEM resistor is the narrow valve showing this, and the water has resistance. And then the flow, you measure it, and that's your answer. Okay, this is a super simplified version, but this is how you do mathematics with nature. Okay, this is absolutely beautiful. It's gorgeous. I love this concept. Now we're going to get into the 24-bit fixed point number versus the FP32 that we covered some of the basics of the chip. We're going to talk about the precision problem. 24-bit fixed point. Well, it has the term fixed in there. It's a uniform precision, limited dynamic range, efficient for a specific task. FP32 floating point, how they've made this, is as variable precision. It's a huge dynamic range, a standard for AI training. You have a sine, you have an exponent that's 8 bits, and you have a mantissa, which is 23 bits. And so you can represent either very small numbers or very huge numbers. Now, to be clear, what they did is they used this 24-bit, as I said, with bit slicing, and they're kind of making it look like this. Okay, they're trying to represent this. But just so you know how this works, this FP32, floating point breakdown, anatomy of a number, sine, exponent, mantissa. And so using these three things, you can get super small numbers or super big numbers. And this is what they're doing with their 24-bit fix. They're slicing it up and they're breaking it into different parts in this type of fashion. Now, I want to come to this point right here, because even in a Nature paper, let's say that this super early, I mean, as early as it gets, they're doing it on a 16 by 16 matrix, right? Which is extremely small. Okay. And they're doing it in a lab setting where everything's perfect. Okay. But even with this, right, you still, let's say it's solved. Let's say you've solved it. You still have the write issue, the writing to the chip. And to the analog chip. And the problem is, this is not what it actually looks like. It's just a representation. You have the top electrode, you have the bottom electrode, and you have a conductive filament that goes through the MEM resistor. And there's a resistive switching layer in there. And so this conductive filament is where you put your resistance. And so every time you need to change it, you're going to zap it with the voltage. But this is a physical piece, and it's very thin, like the filament in a light, on those old light bulbs. And so when you do that, this degrades over time much quicker than flash memory does, okay? And that's one of the biggest issues with these chips. And so the way you think of it is like, I'm going to give you a weird example. Well, not weird, just a generic example. I have a large language model and I'm training it, okay? So the first thing I need to do is I pass it this image of a dog and I set the weights. Okay, so I go ahead and when I set the weights, what does that mean? It means I zap this and I'm going to make it 0.01. Okay, so I feed that dog image into it, and then that flows through all the other weights, and then when it flows to this one, right, comes out at the end, and it says it's a cat, and we go, oh, you stupid LLM, that's wrong. Okay, what do? We go in and we adjust these weights. Well, now we got to zap this again. Okay, but every time I zap this, right, because it has a very limited life, it gets a little bit more imprecise. Okay, and that is a big issue, right? It does not have the ability like digital, where it's like, okay, I'm just putting it into the slot. It's a 0 or a 1. That's all it can be. It's fixed. And so you can write to digital things, not unlimited, but a high amount of writes. They don't have an issue with writing. This has a big issue with writing. And not only with just the amount of writes that you can do to it, but how you have to write to it, right? Because you're using physics. You have to zap it with the voltage. What if, you want 0.01 for my weight, and now I'm like, oh, you said, cat, and it's a dog. I need to adjust this weight. Now I need something small, like 0.002, right? But when I zap it, it's 0.0021. instead. And so that's the issue with this. This is another big issue that has to be solved. Okay, and I'm not saying they're not working on it. They're working on all of these things. But just to say this is solved, it's not. It's not, okay? Right? And then, of course, you have the regular error rate that comes from the environment and things like that. But anyways, so let's talk about some of the good things. I just want to show you this. And also, this will show you the difference in the matrix size, right? When you talk about the 1000 higher throughput, it's not at the 16 by 16 matrix size. You can see here at 16 by 16, a digital GPU is just as fast as an analog resistive RAM, right? Not just as fast, it's under it, sorry. And this is logarithmic, so it's more than you think, but it's similar. It's similar at the scale. This 1000x higher throughput doesn't happen until you get to the large matrices, the 128 times the 128, right? Then it's 1000x. And that's because this grows exponentially, the advantage of it. And so like if in the future LLMs get bigger, imagine that LLMs are the way to AGI. They get bigger. And now we're using bigger matrices, then you would have even more advantage from an analog chip, right? So let's say you have, 256 times 256. Well, this 1000x isn't going to be 2000. It's probably going to be like, I don't know, 10, maybe even 100,000 times the effectiveness, okay? So that's how that works. The iterative precision refinement, this goes back to the user who is talking about how they work. I just want to show this. Imagine that you have it come through. It has this initial guess. The guess is always fuzzy. That's why you have the digital component to it. And so it says, hey, I think this result is like 90% correct. It runs it through again. Here's your answer the second time, right? And then now it says, well, I think that portion is about 90% correct. So then it runs that remaining part through again, and we get this. And so eventually, after running it 10 times, we get down to this 24-bit equivalent that we see over here in the Nature magazine. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. And then one thing I want to show, to show people who are like, oh, you're anti this. No, I'm not, right? I would love to have this technology. I think it would be great if China developed this. 6G signal detection accuracy, MIMO text, right? So remember where I said that this operates like, what could a military use it for? Explosions, because explosions have air. Well, in signals, you obviously have noise, right? You have noise. And so where there is noise, these kind of chips actually do very well because it's like, hey, we have noise, and that noise essentially, it doesn't matter as much. And so we can see in this test, the standard digital GPU versus the Peking analog chip, right? You can't see the dashed line. You know why? Because it's under the solid line. They perform exactly the same already right now. And this does this at 100x less energy consumption. Okay, so just think about that, 100x less energy consumption on something that's useful right now that can already do. So you can see this, being very interesting to Huawei or something like that for telecommunications and stuff like that. And so when we have this, I want to bring up, this was the first paper. This was 2023. This is already 2 years. They talked about these issues in the Excel. This is also from Tsinghua University. They talked about the issues in their Excel chips. And now 2 years later, they have a proposal to fix, one of them. And I'm not saying they're not doing anything. It's just that these things go slow. When you have a new groundbreaking technology like this, it doesn't happen in months. It doesn't happen in weeks or days. It takes a while, okay? But what they're looking at here is they're talking about, when they first made this paper, they're talking about photoelectronic chip. Why? Because photoelectronics also has noise. Obviously, if you've ever taken a picture of something, you know about noise. If you're really, not if you've taken a picture. Some people take a picture, they don't have any idea what's happening. But if you're into photography, then you know about the noise in the photo. Okay, and so that's, again, another strong case for this. And they even say right here where it could be very useful in wearable devices, autonomous driving, and industrial inspections. And I didn't mention this in my last video. And it's like, yes, of course, autonomous driving would be a huge, huge edge computing case for analog computing, right? Because you have the vision network, the vision neural networks on them. Okay, so they need to have the best processing of the visuals that they're getting. That would be just tremendous for analog computing. Another thing, of course, would be in hospitals, with the imaging in hospitals, MRI machines, X-rays, CT scans, other things like that. So the applications for these, right, it could have a tremendous impact on a lot of fields. Let me get my my face up big. It can have a tremendous impact across a lot of fields. But when it comes to AI training, guys, I personally think it's going to be a while. So that's all I'm saying. So that is my view. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this made sense. Hope I cleared things up. As always, please like and subscribe down below, and I will see you in the comments.